Russia is preparing to attack European Union countries. This could happen within the next few years.
By 2029, Russia will be capable of waging a large-scale war, attacking NATO territory.
But the first strike could come in just a few months.
We are running out of time.
From threats to the European Union.
We will destroy you all, and we will destroy your cities.
And accusations of fascism.
We must eradicate it across all of Europe.
Russia is moving to concrete action. It is building military infrastructure on the border with EU countries, preparing to deploy troops there. Which EU country will Russia attack first? Is Europe ready for an invasion, and will NATO be able to protect Europeans? Watch in the special report, Russia's Next War, how the Kremlin is preparing to strike the EU. These tanks can strike EU states. Russia is ramping up its production of armored vehicles, producing 1,500 tanks per year, and some of them are being sent to storage. For the war in Ukraine, that many aren't needed. Putin is stockpiling them for another purpose. Western intelligence and EU military leadership are already stating this openly.
This equipment is going not only to the front lines in Ukraine, but also to new military units aimed at the West. 1,500 tanks a year. For comparison, the 5 largest NATO countries in Europe have only 750 tanks combined.
Russia has shifted its economy to a wartime footing. It is already producing 4 times more ammunition than all NATO members combined. This is clearly not being done just for the war with Ukraine. EU Defense Commissioner Andrius Kubilius provides alarming statistics.
At this moment, Russia is producing more weapons in 3 months than all members of the North Atlantic Alliance, including the US, Canada, the UK, Norway, and EU countries produce in an entire year. In 2025, Russia will spend more on war than the entire European Union combined.
Kubilius asserts the EU is not preparing adequately for possible aggression. And as a result, Eastern Europe could face the threat of occupation.
Independence is easy to lose, but very hard to get back. Right now, we must be ready to defend our European independence.
And the threat is only growing. This is echoed by NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte.
Russia has aligned with China, North Korea, and Iran. Putin's war machine is accelerating, not slowing down. Russia is rebuilding its forces using Chinese technology and is ramping up weapons production faster than we expected.
Putin has expanded the Russian army to 1.5 million soldiers. New divisions are being created with a total of 150,000 troops. They will be concentrated along the EU borders. These troops will be trained in Belarus. And this fall, Russia will conduct large-scale military exercises there, unrelated to Ukraine. They are directed toward the West. And it is precisely from Belarus that the biggest threat of a Russian invasion into EU countries may come. Putin needs to establish a land corridor to the Kaliningrad region, to occupy this stretch of Lithuanian and Polish territory. Russian troops could invade from 2 directions, from the east, Belarus, and from the west, Russia's Kaliningrad region. It's very telling that in Kaliningrad, the Kremlin is also increasing its military presence. This Russian region is essentially a Trojan horse inside the European Union. For a long time, it was left weakened militarily. In fact, in 2022, most of the troops from there were sent to fight in Ukraine, and almost all of them were wiped out by Ukrainian forces near Kharkiv. But Putin continues to pump troops into Kaliningrad. Why? Most likely with the aim of launching a lightning attack, not only from Belarus, but also from Kaliningrad. Former U.S. Army Europe Commander Ben Hodges stated, the Russians might begin with massive shelling.
They will certainly carry out air and missile strikes on transport infrastructure in Lithuania, Poland, and Latvia, just as they do in Ukraine.
Next, Russian forces could cross the border and then leverage their overwhelming numerical advantage in manpower. Because in the Suwalki corridor area, there are not enough NATO forces.
The numerical superiority could be tenfold. And you know, military science says, if you have that kind of superiority in manpower and means, victory may be guaranteed even if it means overwhelming the enemy with sheer numbers.
If the Russians seize the Suwalki corridor, they will cut off Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia from the rest of NATO. They could do this within 10 days.
And will NATO be ready to respond in such a short time? No, it won't. Today, NATO, being a deeply defensive alliance, does not have the strength or capability to counter such a development. Every day of occupation will cost tens or hundreds of thousands of lives. Total looting.
Driving Russian troops out of occupied territories will be extremely difficult, especially since the occupiers will use civilians as human shields. Once a section is seized, Putin may then use the so-called salami tactics, slicing off territory bit by bit, conquering more and more land in stages. This could include Poland and the Baltic states.
The more passive the response, the more the Kremlin will believe it can get away with.
Piece by piece, while closely watching NATO's reaction, Russia assumes it can subjugate the Baltic states this way, then more, then Finland, then Poland, then Slovakia and Hungary, who should not entertain illusions that if they throw open their doors to Russian soldiers, they'll be greeted with hugs and spared. They'll be looted just like Ukraine.
Russia is already creating a threat for Finland. Near the border, in the area of the military base in Kamenka, Leningrad Oblast, it is building military infrastructure. Satellite images already show hundreds of new tents for personnel and depots for storing equipment. In Petrozavodsk, 160 kilometers from the Finnish border, the Russians are expanding bases for a new army command, which in the coming years is set to lead tens of thousands of troops. Activity in this region is growing.
They're building logistical roads. What is a logistical road? It's a road that runs parallel to the expected future front line. Since 2015, the Russian Federation has been constructing military towns along Ukraine's borders. Now they are expanding infrastructure along Finland's border. Why? The answer will come in a couple of years.
Finland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Poland. One or several of these countries may be attacked by Russia. Intelligence services in Germany and Denmark claim a military invasion is possible within the next 5 years.
2029 is the threshold when Russia will be capable of waging large-scale war, including a potential attack on NATO territory. We see how Putin's intentions, his armament, and his troop numbers all converge on this date.
Western intelligence agencies clearly see the Kremlin preparing for war against the European Union, just as they had warned of Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. And before that, there were Russian cyberattacks on Ukrainian infrastructure, especially power plants. Sabotage, explosions at military depots. Before launching a full-scale war, Russia wages a hybrid war. That's the preparation phase. Now, EU countries are facing this too. May 2024, a massive fire in Warsaw at the Marywilska shopping center. Polish authorities investigated and found the arson was orchestrated by Russian intelligence. Prime Minister Donald Tusk confirmed it. Some of the perpetrators have already been arrested. The rest have been identified and are being hunted.
We have irrefutable evidence that the massive fire at Marywilska shopping center was set by Russian intelligence. It was a miracle no one died. We will not tolerate this.
Arsons in Europe are becoming more frequent. For example, in Lithuania, within just 1 month, 5 separate fires broke out at various businesses. One of the main theories, sabotage by Russian intelligence. Other EU states are also under threat. Sweden's security police uncovered that Russia is trying to recruit drug addicts to carry out sabotage. Norwegian intelligence also stated that the risk of sabotage in their country is rising. Russia is ramping up cyber attacks on the European Union. Poland is feeling it the most. Russian hackers are almost daily attempting to disable its power plants, water supply systems, and government agencies.
And Russia is doing this openly. Its military intelligence agency, the GRU, has more than doubled its cyber operations against Poland over the past year.
Russia is spying on British nuclear submarines. The newspaper The Telegraph reports that the military discovered tracking sensors for submarines. This poses a national security threat because those submarines carry nuclear missiles and are central to Britain's deterrence strategy. If Russia were to destroy them, it could theoretically launch a nuclear strike on Britain without fearing retaliation. Russia's ambassador to the UK didn't even bother denying the spying.
You don't deny it?
I'm not going to deny it.
Then the ambassador began boasting, saying that Russia's nuclear weapons are far more modern.
British submarines are equipped with outdated nuclear warheads.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer announced that the country will allocate $15 billion to develop new nuclear warheads. London also decided to build 12 new nuclear submarines in preparation for aggression from Russia. The hybrid war against the European Union is also unfolding in the Baltic Sea. Tankers from Russia's shadow fleet are cutting underwater infrastructure, internet cables, electric lines, and gas pipelines. EU countries are now using their navies to counter such sabotage, and this is turning into open confrontation. In May, the Estonian Navy tried to stop the Russian shadow fleet tanker Jaguar to inspect its registration. The Russian crew refused to comply. Russia launched a Su-35 fighter jet to escort the tanker. The military jet violated NATO airspace in the process. Portuguese F-16s based in Estonia under a NATO mission responded to the incursion. But they were on an air policing mission, meaning they were only allowed to circle above the sea and nothing more. Estonian politicians and military experts have long called for this air policing mission to become full-fledged air defense. But so far, it's just talk. The attempt to stop the Russian shadow tanker ended in failure. Estonian naval vessels had no choice but to trail alongside it until it entered Russian waters. The West showed hesitation, which Putin sees as weakness, and that sets a dangerous precedent.
It's the same old concern of not escalating further, which in my opinion is a mistake when dealing with Russia. The problem is, no response to provocations, and that gives Russia a green light to carry out more and more provocations.
Having seen that there was no reaction, Russia is now using warships to escort shadow tankers in the Gulf of Finland. And its aircraft are more frequently violating NATO airspace, especially over the Baltic Sea. Many politicians in Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia are outraged, saying the Russians are openly mocking NATO forces.
This is Russia's strategy, to test whether NATO and the EU can strike back and push back.
Lithuanian politicians are convinced the West must respond to the Russians. A clear reaction protocol is needed, specifying when NATO forces may open fire. But all of this remains just words. Military analysts in Lithuania suggest taking a cue from Turkey. In 2015, a Russian fighter jet violated Turkish airspace, and the Turks simply shot it down. After that, Russia never violated their airspace again. Yes, it triggered a diplomatic scandal. Putin threatened retaliation. And then, 7 years later, he went to meet Erdogan like nothing had happened, and waited humbly while Erdogan was late. The Kremlin dictator only understands the language of force, and only force can put him in his place. European leaders, for now, are mostly showing Putin their softness and unwillingness to escalate. Meanwhile, Putin's propaganda keeps portraying EU countries as cruel, aggressive, almost fascist regimes that want to destroy Russia. This is meant to prepare Russians for war against the European Union. Russian politicians accuse the EU of Nazism.
The European Union openly wants to revive the European ideology of Nazism. We will not tolerate this. We will do everything in our power to ensure this ideology never rises again and is destroyed once and for all.
That's exactly what Russia's Security Council Deputy Chairman Dmitry Medvedev is saying too.
True denazification is needed. Nazism must be eradicated across all of Europe.
A political analyst close to Putin, Sergei Karaganov, calls Europe a spawn of hell and threatens it with nuclear weapons.
Rain of fire will consume them. Perhaps it's time to remind them of this rain? They're already afraid. Our tactical nuclear weapons are 3 times more powerful. Europe has no adequate defense system.
These words aren't just empty talk. They're part of the Kremlin propaganda.
When French or German journalists ask me, do you really mean that? Yes, we do. We will destroy all of you. We will burn your cities. Your cities will burn.
Just like 10 years ago when Putin's mouthpiece, Dmitry Kiselyov, threatened to turn the West into
radioactive ash.
But all this is bluff. Russia is not using nuclear weapons against Ukraine, and it will not use them against NATO countries. The UK and France both possess nuclear arsenals. President Emmanuel Macron has proposed that European countries rely on France's nuclear deterrent to protect the entire EU from Russian threats. Europeans understand, a nuclear strike on the EU is just Putin's scare tactic. The real threat is a possible military invasion by Russia into EU territory. And Europe is now preparing for that possibility. In May, Estonia launched its largest military exercises yet, Hedgehog 25, involving 16,000 troops from 10 NATO countries. The scenario: Russian forces breach the border, activating NATO's Mutual Defense Clause. At the same time, Finland began its biggest drills in recent years, involving troops not only from Finland but also from the UK, the US, and other allies. EU countries are turning their borders with Russia into fortified defense lines, building hundreds of bunkers and engineering barriers. Even minefields are planned. Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and Poland have announced their withdrawal from the international treaty banning the use of anti-personnel mines. Even countries that don't border Russia are preparing. Germany has announced a massive rearmament program through 2029. The entire EU is following suit, planning to increase total defense spending to a staggering 800 billion euros. To achieve this, the European Commission has allowed member states to exceed previously imposed deficit limits. 150 billion euros in loans will be allocated specifically for defense investment. Europe is trying to catch up because for decades, while Russia was rearming, many EU countries spent little on defense.
After the Cold War, many believed Russia could be integrated into Europe's economic and security structure. We cut our defense spending from 3.5% of GDP nearly in half. We thought we were enjoying a peace dividend, but what we really ended up with was a security deficit.
For decades, the EU relied on protection from the United States. There are about 100,000 American troops stationed in Europe. But that number could soon be drastically reduced. Confidence that the US would protect Europe from a Russian invasion is waning. President Donald Trump made it clear when he criticized Europe's low defense spending.
Well, I've said that to them. I said, if you're not going to pay, we're not going to defend. I said that 7 years ago.
Trump is demanding that all EU countries spend 5% of GDP on defense. For many nations, that's an unattainable figure. Belgium, Spain, and Italy don't even spend 2%. By comparison, Russia plans to spend 9% of its GDP on war in 2025. But even if EU countries drastically increase spending, that won't guarantee security. Mass production of weapons and ammunition takes years.
We must drastically strengthen our air defense. Its capacity must grow by 400%. We see in Ukraine how Russia wages aerial terror. We must build a shield to protect our skies.
We must be ready by 2029, European politicians keep saying. But a Russian invasion, like an attempt to seize the Suwalki Gap, could come much sooner.
To prepare and launch such an operation, Russia wouldn't need 3 to 5 years. It would need 3 to 5 weeks.
Even EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas warns the invasion could come before 2029. Right now, the only thing holding Russia back is Ukraine.
Time is running out. Ukrainians are fighting for their freedom and ours. They are buying us time.
Putin's army is bogged down in Ukraine. That's what prevents it for now from launching a full-scale war against the EU. This is NATO's window of opportunity to prepare for what's coming.
But NATO is still not ready for a large-scale war with Russia. Not in terms of troop numbers, not in terms of weaponry or equipment. NATO simply isn't prepared to fight the kind of war Russia has learned to wage in Ukraine. Only 2 countries in the world have that kind of experience, Ukraine and Russia. And Ukraine is now the key to NATO's future.
Modern war is nothing like what NATO generals once prepared for. Tanks and planes no longer dominate, drones do. And no EU country, no NATO member, has the experience that Ukraine does. Ukrainian instructors are already sharing their knowledge with NATO forces. Baltic countries are adopting Ukrainian-made command and control systems.
Ukrainian expertise is vital. Germany, for example, currently produces 0 FPV drones. Some countries do produce combat drones, but they're incredibly expensive, 20,000 to 100,000 euros apiece. Ukraine builds them for just 2,000 euros.
Producing a NATO standard artillery shell in Ukraine costs 8 times less than in the EU. Europe stands to gain by financing Ukraine, integrating Ukraine's military capabilities into Europe's collective defense. Let Ukraine build weapons. Let Ukraine destroy Russian hardware. Let Ukraine prevent Putin from ever attacking the EU.
All Europe has to do is provide the funding and deliver weapons. It's essential for European security. Ukraine is fighting where we don't yet have to. That is a small price for us to pay.
Prime ministers and presidents of Eastern and Central Europe openly say they're preparing for a Russian attack, and that right now, Ukraine is their front line.
We have a chance to weaken Russia's army, to destroy its tanks, drones, and troops right in Ukraine. So why do countries like Germany and Poland contribute only 5% of their defense budgets to Ukraine? Why do countries like Spain and Greece offer just 1%?
The EU isn't doing enough to support Ukraine. Even the EU's top diplomat says so.
We can and must do more. With our help, Ukraine can win. The only language Putin understands is the language of force. The EU has that force. The EU's economy is 17 times larger than Russia's. We must make Putin understand that he will lose and stop him before he comes for us.
But for now, the European Union is, in a way, feeding the monster that's preparing to attack it. According to the German newspaper Bild, this year, Russia will receive 20 billion euros from EU countries for energy imports. That's more than the European Union is spending on military aid to Ukraine. And Russia will funnel this money into weapons and ammunition production. This is absurd, says former U.S. Army Europe Commander Ben Hodges. If Europe wants to disarm Russia rather than arm it, it must drastically toughen its stance on the aggressor.
It's necessary to shut down Russia's illegal shadow fleet, and by doing so, cut off its oil exports via the Baltic Sea to China and India. That would cause serious trouble for Moscow. What's needed is a combination of economic sanctions and direct damage to the Russian military. That's the path to Ukraine's victory, and Europe must help make it happen.
According to polls, the majority of EU citizens support providing military aid to Ukraine. They understand their own security is at stake. They understand Europe itself is on the brink of war. But many Europeans aren't mentally ready for that war.
Emotionally, I feel like I don't even want to think about something like that.
Honestly, I just try to push those thoughts away.
I don't know. Really, I don't. Maybe our grandparents were more prepared for this.
People here are used to comfort, safety, and stability. For most Europeans, war is something from another reality. Over recent decades, the size of European armies has steadily shrunk. And now EU governments admit they don't have enough soldiers. In Germany, for instance, it's been announced that the Bundeswehr currently has only 180,000 troops. But the minimum needed to counter Russia's threat is 260,000. Mandatory military service might return to the country as early as next year. That decision has already been made in Denmark, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. If you want peace, prepare for war. European leaders keep repeating this phrase more and more often. EU countries must drastically increase their military strength to counter Russia. The time for talk, political statements, and fear of escalation is over. It's time to act. It's time to support Ukraine. The only way to stop the war and prevent its flames from engulfing Europe is through force. This is a matter of survival for the entire European Union. Special report by Maxim Urlapov.